I'll be presenting our findings on the dangers of octopus farming and our policy responses since this has begun. My name is Amanda Fox. I'm the Executive Director of Animal Research Initiative, which is a United States-based nonprofit that promotes peer-reviewed research in order to protect natural biodiversity and ecological well-being. So a little bit of background information. In 2021, the London School of Economics compiled a over 300 studies report on the sentience capacity of octopus and their capability of suffering and experiencing joy. And then in 2022, a Spanish company, Nueva Pesca Nova, leaked plans to BBC for their intention to open a intensive confinement concentrated animal feeding operation in the Canary Islands, aiming to produce over 1 million pounds of octopuses per year. So since then, our organization had introduced a bill in Washington state to prohibit the factory farming of octopuses. We did that in December 2022, and then that ended up passing in March 2024. The only known farm of octopuses in Hawaii was closed down by public officials for illegally removing octopuses from the water. And then we've introduced a bill in Hawaii, California, and several other states, Oregon, Connecticut, New York, etc. And then in April 2024, Spain actually denied the permits for that large commercial farm in the Canary Islands, recognizing the immense ecological impact that it would have. So since then, many more bills have been introduced internationally to address this issue, and I'll go into a few reasons why. Octopuses are biologically incompatible with artificial stocking densities. The most concerning aspect of this is that octopuses have no immunological memory, so they can't be vaccinated against, parasites or other diseases like you would think in conventional food systems. They're also semiparous, which means that they die after breeding, and no other food system requires that the breeding pairs, like the reproducing pairs, would perish after breeding only one time. And they also have specific copper-based blood that requires 3 hearts to pump blood throughout their body. And when they're swimming, their primary heart actually stops beating, which means they can't swim for long periods of time. They get exhausted very easily. And when we're talking about housing 50 to 200 octopuses in a single tank, they have no way to escape each other's aggressive cannibalistic behavior because of this. Octopuses are also carnivorous animals with extremely high capacity to eat a lot of food in a day. They need 3 pounds of animal-based feed to gain a single pound. So if that farm, for example, is trying to produce 1 million pounds, that means at least they would need 3 million pounds of animal-based feed, requiring the deaths of exponential amounts of animals. One estimate I saw was about 28,000 tons of food per year. Their studies show that their optimal growth includes crustaceans. It needs to include crustaceans to be able to grow, which would require a massive amount of crustacean-based resources to be diverted for a single octopus farm. And in our research, crustacean populations around the whole United States have already severely diminished, with many crustacean fisheries already in collapse. So we've researched from Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, California, Maine to Florida, and every single state has fisheries that in the last 3 decades have diminished about 80% on average, with a lot of them, like I said, the New York American lobster is completely collapsed. Hawaii spiny lobsters completely collapsed. There's also threats of octopuses escaping and impacting the ecosystems. They're known to escape. They're driven by their instinct to hunt and find prey and also to mate. So they try to escape all the time. These escapes are reported in aquariums with only one octopus, and we're talking about having 200 in a tank. So obviously this is a risk. Like I said, they have voracious diets. And even in the UK this year, there's been an octopus explosion where between 30 and 100% of the crustaceans have been eaten. There's also concerning pathogens that can infect multiple different animals in the ecosystems. So if the octopuses, like I said, can't be immunized. So if they spread different parasites or diseases into the ecosystems, they can infect crabs, they can infect other animals that go on to infect the larger food web. And with such a high diet requirement means a lot of waste runoff from these specific farms. Runoff contains nitrogen and phosphorus, which fuels harmful algae blooms, which then go on to have toxic effects for the animals in the water and means that those animals also aren't consumable by people either. The impacts of harmful algae blooms are very widespread. A toxic algae bloom, basically, if an animal like a manatee or a sea turtle swims through an algae bloom, they can have seizures. If there's too much toxic algae in the water, governments have to roll back crabbing seasons or fishing seasons because the toxins are so highly contaminated in the animals, and also will require beaches to close, and lakes would be unswimmable. There's already evidence in Guam, for example, that usually more than half of their beaches are closed because of harmful algae blooms. And this also affects other fisheries as well. There was a major salmon kill at an aquaculture facility in Maine in 2024 that was based on this harmful algae bloom toxins. There's already 24,000 concentrated animal feeding operations in the United States alone, pumping out about almost 1 trillion pounds of animal fecal waste per year. So adding in an octopus farm in any state or country would contribute immensely. There are stress-induced behavioral abnormalities that have been recorded extensively. So like I said, 200 cannibalistic animals in a single tank exposes them to cannibalism. They also have been shown to self-harm, so removing their own legs, or their own arms, for example. And previous attempts to cultivate octopus have extremely high mortality rates, with survivability being recorded at 50% maximum. So that means that more than 50% of the animals die all the time. So if we were thinking about this for swine farming, for example, it would require the death of the breeding pair, so the sow and the contributing male, and over half of the piglets. So this is obviously not a sustainable food system. And scientists all over the world are coming together to advocate against this, like Professor Jennifer Jacquet. Like I said, the London School of Economics, over 100 different scientists have signed on to letters advocating against this because of the octopus's high intelligence and their biological incompatibilities. So to summarize quickly, a single farm producing 1 million pounds of octopus, like I said, they have a 50% maximum survivability rate. So this is a huge amount of wasted carcasses and animal fecal waste that would go into the environment. Escapes are extremely highly likely. The animals are exposed to violent aggression, like strangulation, for example, is recorded frequently. Significant environmental contamination with parasites. It would put more pressure on already overtaxed fisheries that are recording over 80% losses already. And these facilities would require 24/7 access to electricity, which would mean that in any power outage, they would have a mass die-off. It would require fishing advisories, beach closures, and extreme animal mortality. So for this reason, we're advocating against opening any type of artificial concentrations of animal or octopus-based farms. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time today. You can visit our website, animalresearchinitiative.org, to see more of our research. I invite everyone here to add me on LinkedIn. I'd really like to get to know more of you. Your research is very interesting. Thank you so much.